It all kicked off with something I could never have imagined. I ended up sleeping with my best friend's wife. Yeah, I get how that sounds. But let me assure you, it wasn't just a one-off mistake fueled by too many drinks. It felt more like I had stumbled into a trap, and by the time I grasped how ensnared I was, it was already too late. To truly understand how I ended up here, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back when I believed my life was perfect, or at least I thought so. Sarah was my everything. When you marry someone, you assume you're committing to a lifetime together. We spent over 10 years together, 6 of which were as a married couple, and throughout that time, she truly was my everything. Sarah wasn't just a pretty face, sure. She was stunning, but she was also incredibly intelligent. Her confidence had a way of making everyone else feel insignificant, and somehow I was lucky enough to call her my wife. I never imagined I'd be reminiscing about her like this. Then there's my career. I work in financial consulting, a stable job, yes, but it comes with its challenges. Plenty of travel, endless nights in lonely hotel rooms, and late-night emails. I never thought it was an issue, though. Sarah always seemed to understand. Or at least that's what I believed. I figured that as long as I was taking care of things and contributing, everything would be just fine. And then there's Michael, my best friend since college. That guy could charm the pants off anyone. Women were drawn to him like moths to a flame, and he reveled in it. But eventually, even Michael said he wanted to settle down. He married Jessica, a quiet yet intelligent woman who seemed to balance out his wild nature. I was genuinely happy for him. Michael and Sarah got along famously, and between the 4 of us, life felt complete. You know how they say, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Well, I certainly didn't see that coming. It was a few years ago when I stumbled upon Michael's dirty little secret. We were having dinner at my place, just like we did many times before. After we ate, Michael left his phone on my kitchen counter while we cleaned up. A notification appeared. At first, I didn't mean to snoop, but then I caught a glimpse of a message. Can't wait to see you tonight. It wasn't from Jessica. One thing led to another, and there I was, scrolling through his texts, my stomach churning. I discovered everything. Flirty messages, secret meeting plans, and even pictures. Michael was having an affair with a younger coworker, and I had all the evidence I needed. That night, I confronted him. I laid it all out, no sugarcoating. Michael tried to brush it off, but I wasn't going to let that slide. I told him he needed to stop immediately, go back to Jessica, and fix his damn marriage. I swore I wouldn't breathe a word to anyone if he promised to end the affair. He agreed. I thought that was the end of it. Then came the night when everything started to come apart. Michael and Jessica joined us for dinner at my house, just like old times. Sarah was in the kitchen, and I was pouring drinks when I noticed Jessica's gaze fixed on Michael and Sarah, her expression tense, as if she was holding back something significant. I figured maybe she had a tough day, so I didn't think much of it. But then she leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Have you ever thought there might be more than just friendship between them? She asked. I laughed it off, trying to keep things light, but Jessica didn't share my amusement. She just stared at me, dead serious, and said, I think Michael is cheating on me, and I suspect it's with your wife. That hit me like a ton of bricks. My first reaction was to dismiss her, to tell her she was being irrational, that Sarah would never betray me like that, and Michael wasn't that reckless. But the intensity in Jessica's gaze suggested she knew something I didn't. Just watch them, she whispered. Pay attention to how they interact. So we both glanced into the living room, trying to remain discreet. There they were, Michael and Sarah, sitting just a bit too close, laughing a little too heartily at some inside joke. At first, I told myself they were simply comfortable with one another. But then Sarah's hand brushed against Michael's arm, and the way he looked at her. Something about it sent a knot twisting in my stomach. This isn't the first time, Jessica murmured, her voice so soft it felt like a knife scraping against my skin. I suspect they've been meeting up behind our backs. My mind was racing, but I forced myself to remain composed. I didn't want to believe it. Sure, Sarah and I had our share of issues like any couple, but cheating? No way. That just wasn't who we were. Yet, Jessica's words planted a seed of doubt that felt like a crack in my reality. And once you see a crack, it's impossible to unsee it. Following that chat with Jessica, I tried to shove the thoughts out of my mind. I told myself she was probably just paranoid, projecting her problems with Michael onto my relationship with Sarah. But something had changed. Once that doubt took root, it was like my mind wouldn't let it go. It lingered, growing, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it was already too late. Suspicion has a way of burrowing under your skin, and before I realized it, I started noticing things I'd previously overlooked, or perhaps things I simply didn't want to see. I began observing Sarah with a scrutinizing eye that I hadn't used before. Every time she smiled at her phone, every time she stepped out of the room to take a call, it put me on edge. I found myself doing things I never thought I would. Checking her phone when she wasn't paying attention, scrolling through her social media late into the night, sifting through her messages, desperately hoping to find something, anything. But there was nothing. Her phone was spotless. Her social media seemed typical.
No secret conversations, no hidden apps, no incriminating texts.
Initially, I felt a wave of relief, but that relief was short-lived. If there were no indications of wrongdoing, it didn't necessarily mean she was innocent. It simply suggested that she was exceptionally skilled at concealing the truth. Once that notion took root in my mind, I was utterly trapped. I found myself waking in the middle of the night, frantically scrolling through her phone again like a man possessed, desperately searching for anything I might have overlooked. My imagination began to run wild, filling in the blanks where there was nothing to see. Every late-night text, every unexplained chuckle. Suddenly, everything felt like a piece of the puzzle. Then there was Jessica. She knew just how to keep the fire of suspicion burning. She started sending me these vague messages, just enough to keep my doubts alive, but not enough to provide any real answers. I saw Michael texting Sarah again. She'd casually drop, "Do you think they meet during lunch while you're at work?" It was subtle, yet it was sufficient to keep me ensnared. Each time I began to think I was being irrational, Jessica would nudge me right back into that downward spiral. I couldn't determine whether she was genuinely trying to help or if she had her own motives for stirring the pot. But honestly, I didn't care. I simply wanted the truth, whatever that truth might be. One day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Sarah mentioned she had plans to meet a friend in the city, and I feigned nonchalance. Instead of staying at work, I cut my day short and drove home, hoping to catch them off guard if they were indeed up to something. I honestly don't know what I expected to discover. Michael's car parked in the driveway, the two of them tangled up on the living room couch. Truthfully, I had no clue what I was hoping for, but I felt compelled to see it with my own eyes. Upon arriving home, I was met with an eerie silence. No car in the driveway, no signs of life inside. Just the unsettling quiet that made me question my sanity. I wandered through every room, checking closets like some fool in a bad thriller, hoping, maybe even praying, that I was mistaken. But the house was empty. Nothing seemed amiss. When Sarah finally returned, I was slumped on the couch, pretending I hadn't spent the afternoon pacing anxiously through the house. She appeared momentarily taken aback to see me, but it was fleeting. "Hey, I thought you had a late day today," she remarked, dropping her bag at the door. "Yeah, things wrapped up early," I replied, striving to keep my tone neutral. "How was your day?" She smiled, just like she always did, as if everything were perfectly fine. "It was good. We stayed out a little longer than I anticipated, but it was nice to catch up." "Staying in the city?" I asked, maintaining a casual demeanor, though every word she spoke felt like a dagger twisting in my gut. "Yeah," she replied, breezing past me into the kitchen. "Just some window shopping and a long lunch." I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation, but I could feel the doubt gnawing at the edges of my mind. There was something about the way she answered, as if it was too smooth, too rehearsed. Or perhaps that was just my paranoia taking hold. Regardless, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was lying directly to me. That's the insidious nature of suspicion. It makes you question everything, even the things you thought were unshakable. The paranoia gripped me tightly, slowly draining the life out of both me and my marriage. Sarah and I were still going through the motions, sharing dinners, having conversations, even sex when it happened, but it felt like we were merely coasting on empty. Everything seemed off-kilter. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where she truly was when I wasn't around. Each time she laughed at her phone, every mention of Michael's name in conversation felt like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. Meanwhile, Jessica was ever present, continuously poking at my wounds. She knew precisely what to say, what little tidbits to drop, to keep me ensnared. "Guess who I just spotted at the mall today?" she texted one afternoon. "Michael." And Sarah was with him. That didn't add up. Sarah had claimed she'd spent the entire day at home. When I confronted her about it later that evening, she remained as cool as ever, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if she hadn't just shattered my sanity. "All day at home, huh?" I asked nonchalantly, pretending I wasn't already envisioning her sneaking around with Michael. "Yep," she responded without bothering to look up. "Why?" I shrugged. "Just curious." That was the thing about Sarah. She was too damn smooth. She had a knack for deflecting things so expertly that even when I was convinced something was off, she made me feel insane for even considering it. Jessica continued to feed me more coincidences, planting doubts in my mind until I couldn't differentiate between reality and my imagination. She orchestrated these chance encounters between Michael and Sarah, ensuring I heard about them just often enough to keep my suspicions alive. It felt as if she had me on a leash, pulling me further into the depths of paranoia, making it impossible for me to see things clearly. One night, I told Sarah I had a late meeting. She kissed me goodbye, promised to be home when I returned, and went about her day as if nothing were amiss. But instead of heading to work, I doubled back, tailing her car through the city. I was primed to catch her in the act with Michael. I had even imagined how I would confront her. But she never met him. Instead, she went grocery shopping. That was it. No clandestine lover lurking in the parking lot. No stolen moments at a cafe. Just eggs, bread, and a bottle of wine. It was utterly baffling. If Sarah wasn't sneaking off to meet Michael, then why did Jessica keep insisting they were together? Was Sarah truly that adept at hiding her tracks? Or was Jessica toying with me for reasons I couldn't yet decipher? My paranoia didn't simply linger. It festered. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. One night, after Sarah slipped into bed beside me, I turned to face her, my heart racing in my chest. "Sarah?" I began, forcing my voice to remain calm. "Do you think maybe Michael has gotten a little too close for comfort?" She blinked at me, her expression shifting from bewilderment to irritation. "What are you talking about?" I shrugged, trying to keep my cool. "I don't know. It's just, I've noticed how chummy you two seem." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I caught a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify. Was it disbelief? Anger? Guilt? Couldn't tell. "Jesus, Ethan. Michael is just a friend. What's your problem?" I wanted to trust her. God, I desperately did. But the way she reacted, like I just accused her of the gravest offense, left me feeling unsettled. If there was nothing going on, why was she so defensive? Doubts kept piling up, suffocating me. That's when Jessica invited me over for dinner. We opened a bottle of wine, then another. It didn't take long for the buzz to settle in, that heady feeling where consequences seem distant. Leaning in closer, Jessica's voice dropped to a sultry whisper. "If they're betraying us, shouldn't we do the same? Let's make it even," she suggested. I chuckled at first, dismissing the idea as a joke, but Jessica wasn't playing around. Her hand brushed against mine, and suddenly, the atmosphere shifted, becoming charged with an intensity one hadn't anticipated. "Jessica?" I tried to say no, but the words got caught in my throat. She smiled, slow and knowing, and poured me another glass of wine. "Come on, Ethan. Don't we deserve to have some fun too?" I wish I could say I had the strength to resist, that I walked away, but I didn't. The wine, the frustration, the betrayal, they all swirled together until I could hardly think. One moment we were sitting across from each other, and the next we were entangled on the couch, ripping at each other's clothes like we were possessed by some primal urge. It was reckless, foolish, and dangerous. But in that moment, it felt like the only thing that made sense, the only way to fight back against the chaos that had consumed my life. Afterward, as we lay there in the aftermath, Jessica lit a cigarette and looked at me with that sly smile again. "We should record this," she said casually, as if it were just another ordinary conversation, "in case we need evidence." I was too intoxicated and too far gone to argue. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and let the camera capture everything. Our bodies, our anger, our betrayal, felt like a twisted form of revenge. But as the adrenaline faded, guilt crashed over me like a tidal wave. What had I just done? The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and my stomach tied in knots. For a fleeting moment, I hoped it had all been a nightmare. But as I turned my head, reality hit me hard. There was Jessica, sprawled beside me, looking as satisfied as a cat that just caught its prey. The memories of our reckless night flooded back, slapping me in the face. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, struggling to grasp how I had let things spiral this far. I knew it was wrong. I felt it the moment I crossed that line. But the damage was done, and there was no way to undo it. Jessica, however, seemed utterly unconcerned. She stretched languidly, a grin on her face as if we had just shared a delightful joke. "We need to show them," she declared, her tone disturbingly nonchalant. I blinked at her, still reeling from the wine and the weight of guilt. "What do you mean?" "The video," she said, lighting another cigarette as if it were an everyday occurrence. "It's time to share it." "Jesus, Jessica. What are you talking about?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. "We need to confront them, Ethan. They deserve to see what happens when they betray us." The thought made me feel nauseous. The wine, the betrayal, the shame. It all swirled in my gut. "Jessica, I don't know if—" "Yes, you do," she interrupted sharply. "There's no turning back now. They've brought this on themselves." I felt trapped, like I had stepped into a bear trap, and now the jaws were closing in. The determination in her eyes told me she wouldn't let me slip away from this. I was in too deep, and there was no easy escape. Against every instinct that screamed at me to put an end to this madness, I nodded. The confrontation unfolded the following evening. Sarah entered the house, her usual composed self, but I could barely keep it together, my palms clammy with sweat as I settled her onto the couch. "I need to show you something," I said, my voice flat and brittle. She arched an eyebrow, irritation flashing across her face. "What is this about, Ethan?" I fished my phone from my pocket, my heart racing as I pressed play. The video sprang to life. Grainy footage of Jessica and me entwined in sheets, intoxicated, furious, desperate. I couldn't bring myself to meet Sarah's gaze. I focused on the floor, waiting for her reaction, bracing for the storm that was sure to follow. When the video ended, an oppressive silence filled the room. I finally dared to look up. Sarah sat motionless, her complexion pale, her eyes wide. But it wasn't shock or sadness that I saw. It was pure, unbridled rage. "You did this?" she whispered, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "Over some ridiculous, paranoid fantasy?" I blinked, struggling to wrap my head around her reaction. This wasn't guilt. It was pure, unfiltered fury. "I never cheated on you, Ethan. Not once. And you did this." Sarah shot up from the couch, her face twisted in disgust. "You slept with Jessica because you convinced yourself I was unfaithful?" Before I could muster a response, Michael walked in, confusion etched across his face. Right behind him was Jessica, wearing that infuriatingly smug expression. "What the hell is going on?" Michael demanded, his voice thick with concern. Jessica didn't hesitate. "We know everything, Michael. We know about you and Sarah." Michael looked genuinely puzzled. "What are you talking about?" Sarah turned on him, her voice cutting through the air like glass. "She thinks we've been having an affair." Michael's eyes widened in disbelief as the absurdity of the situation hit him. "You think Sarah and I?" He shook his head, anger bubbling to the surface.
Jesus Christ, Jessica.
You're out of your mind. That's when the real truth came crashing down. Michael shifted his gaze to me, his jaw tight. You want to know what this is about, Ethan? She's punishing me. Jessica found out about my affair from years ago, and now she's dragged you into her little revenge plot. Jessica didn't flinch. You brought this on yourself, she replied coolly. I just gave Ethan a little nudge. The rest was all him. I felt as if the ground had given way beneath me. Every suspicious text, every carefully orchestrated coincidence. It was all part of her twisted game, and I had unwittingly played right into it. Sarah's laugh rang out, bitter and cold. You're pathetic, Ethan. You let her manipulate you into destroying our marriage. All because you couldn't trust me. I tried to explain, to apologize, but Sarah was having none of it. It's far too late for that, she snapped. You threw everything away. Michael stood there, shaking his head, disgust etched across his features. I'm done, Jessica, he said, his voice heavy with finality. We're through. The fallout was swift and brutal. Sarah and I filed for divorce within days. She couldn't forgive me, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. I had allowed jealousy and paranoia to erode everything we had built together. Michael walked out on Jessica too, severing ties with their marriage without a second glance. After that night, I don't think either of us spoke again. 2 marriages shattered. All for what? Some twisted game fueled by lies and suspicion. In the aftermath, everything felt like it had imploded, leaving me in an empty void. I stood amidst the wreckage, trying to understand how the life I thought was unshakable had disintegrated overnight. Sarah was gone. Michael was out of my life. As for Jessica, I didn't even want to entertain thoughts of her. Most painfully, I was left to face myself, haunted by the choices I made, choices that had torn my world apart. The silence in my apartment was deafening. Days blurred into nights. I found myself sitting on the couch, nursing a bottle of whiskey, replaying every argument, every deceit, every missed sign. I tried convincing myself that Sarah had been innocent, that I had shattered everything through my own paranoia. But the reality, the truth was even more gut-wrenching. I had allowed my insecurities to obliterate the one thing I cherished most. I had loved Sarah. I thought she was my forever, and I tossed it all away over a suspicion I couldn't even substantiate. The worst part was seeing how quickly Sarah moved on. I'd catch glimpses of her on social media, laughing with friends, traveling, seemingly unscathed by our past. Meanwhile, I was sinking deeper into despair. She looked perfectly fine without me, as if I were merely a fleeting chapter in her life, while I was left with nothing but regret. Then, out of the blue, a message appeared. I was lounging on my bed, aimlessly scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up.
No sender.
No context, just an anonymous number with a series of photographs attached. Curiosity got the best of me, and I opened them. There she was, Sarah, laughing, kissing, wrapped around some other guy. The timestamps on the photos told a story of their own. These weren't recent. They dated back years. Years during our marriage. Sarah had been involved in an affair, and not with Michael. My heart sank as I scrolled through the images, each one driving the reality deeper into my consciousness. This wasn't just a fling. It was a full-blown relationship. Dinners, vacations, hotel stays. It had all been happening right under my nose, and I had been too preoccupied chasing shadows with Jessica to recognize the truth. Sarah had been deceiving me all along. Staring at the screen, my hands trembled as the weight of it all crashed down on me. All that paranoia about Michael? It had been a distraction, pulling me away from the real betrayal happening right in front of me. Sarah had been leading a double life, and I had been blind to it. I thought I'd hit rock bottom before, but this was a new level of hell. Knowing that I had destroyed everything, my marriage, my friendships, while the real betrayal had unfolded the entire time, made me feel like the biggest fool in the world. After everything crumbled, I felt like a hollow shell, wandering through life without direction. Waking up in my empty apartment was unbearable, the silence suffocating. Every corner echoed memories I couldn't escape. The bed I had once shared with Sarah, the kitchen where we had laughed, the couch where we watched movies together. I loathed it all. I hated how familiar everything felt, yet it belonged to a past I could never reclaim. Days blended into a haze. I drank too much, slept too little, and found myself drawn to Sarah's social media again, even though I knew it would only deepen my anguish. Watching her live her life, smiling, traveling, enjoying time with friends while I fell apart, it felt like I was the only one oblivious to the fact that we were supposed to move on. My apartment morphed into a prison, and every hour spent in it grew heavier than the last. One morning, I reached my breaking point. I packed a bag, booked the first flight I could find, and took off. No plans, no itinerary, just an urgent need to escape the wreckage of my life. I thought that by putting some distance between myself and all the chaos, maybe I would find a sliver of clarity, or at least a hint of peace. I traveled aimlessly, hopping between cities and countries, crashing in cheap hotels, living out of my suitcase. I roamed through ancient streets, explored bustling markets, sipped drinks in local bars, and sat alone in cafes, trying to reconnect with whatever was left of me. Yet, the loneliness clung to me like a shadow, lurking in every quiet moment. The pain didn't vanish just because I was in a new place. It stayed, festering within me, gnawing at the little strength I had left. Then, one evening, in a small coastal town where the waves rolled in rhythmically, I met Rachel. She was perched at the bar, nursing a glass of wine, lost in her thoughts. Something about her, the weariness in her eyes or the way she stared into her drink as if trying to unravel a mystery, pulled me in. I hadn't intended to strike up a conversation, but somehow, I found myself sliding onto the stool beside her. Initially, we exchanged polite pleasantries, typical small talk between two strangers. The weather, the beach, the local cuisine. But there was an undercurrent to our conversation, a heaviness that felt shared but unspoken. It was as if we were both bearing the weight of our pasts, the kind only those who have been broken can recognize in one another. As the minutes passed, our words flowed more freely. Rachel began to share her story, how the man she had trusted with everything had shattered her heart. It wasn't her first betrayal, she confessed, but it was the one that left her utterly drained. As she spoke, I found myself nodding along, resonating with every word because I had been through my own hell. Hell, I was still living it. I opened up about my experiences too, though I held back the darker details at first. I didn't mention the video or the full extent of my betrayal, but I shared enough to show her I wasn't just a passing tourist. I was a man trying to escape the ghosts of my past. Over the following days, Rachel and I kept running into each other. We strolled along the beach in the mornings, met for lunch at the same cafe, and found ourselves at the same bar in the evenings. It was never planned, but it felt effortlessly right. Our conversations grew deeper, and the silences became comfortable. She understood the things I couldn't voice, and I began to realize I wasn't as alone as I had believed. At first, I was hesitant. Trust didn't come easily after what I had experienced with Sarah. But Rachel never pressed me. She allowed me to take my time, and gradually I started to let my defenses down. We shared more than just our heartaches. We talked about our futures, about dreams we still dared to hope for, even if we weren't quite ready to believe in them yet. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we sat on the beach, our feet buried in the cool sand. The waves rolled in steadily, soothing us like a lullaby for weary souls. That night, I bared my soul to her. Not just the outline, but the entire narrative, the paranoia, the betrayal, the blunders I made, and the fallout I couldn't escape. I anticipated her recoiling, perhaps even judging me for my actions. But she didn't. She simply listened, her gaze steady and compassionate. When I finished, Rachel offered a gentle smile tinged with sadness. "We all make mistakes, Ethan," she said softly. "What truly matters is what you decide to do next." In that moment, I realized how long I had been trapped, mired in guilt and regret, punishing myself for things I couldn't change. I had spent so much time looking back that I had forgotten how to look ahead. That night, something shifted within me. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in what felt like ages, I wasn't afraid to discover it. Rachel and I spent the next few weeks together. Though we didn't label our connection, no titles, no promises, it felt genuine. We weren't attempting to fix one another. Instead, we were two individuals, fractured in our own ways, learning how to bear our scars without allowing them to define us. When it came time to part ways, I felt surprisingly unburdened. We exchanged numbers, promising to keep in touch, but there were no grand gestures or declarations, just a shared understanding that whatever lay ahead, we would both be okay. On my last night in that town, I sat alone on the beach, watching the waves wash away the footprints in the sand. The sky was ablaze with shades of orange and pink, and the salty sea breeze wrapped around me. I reflected on everything: Sarah, Michael, and Jessica, the man I once was and the man I aspired to become. And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I realized that life isn't about trying to control every outcome. It's about learning to let go, forgiving yourself, and trusting that even after the most tumultuous storms, there's light waiting on the other side. I stood up, brushed the sand from my clothes, and smiled to myself. There was still a long journey ahead, and I had no idea where it might lead. But that was okay. I take it one step at a time, knowing that I had the power to rebuild. Life had shattered everything I knew, but it also gifted me a chance to start anew. This time, I was determined not to squander it. Update. It's been about a year since everything collapsed and I left that town behind. I thought it was time for an update, not because I have everything figured out, but because things finally feel different, better even. Honestly, for a long time, I wasn't sure if I'd ever reach this point. The weight of everything, Sarah, Michael, Jessica, and my own mistakes, felt like a second skin that I couldn't shake off. But slowly, I began to peel it away layer by layer. It's not perfect. There are still bad days. Yet, I've accepted that healing isn't a straight path. Some scars will linger, and that's perfectly okay. After leaving that small beach town, I moved to a city a few states away, somewhere no one knew my name or my history. It was a fresh start. I rented a modest apartment, nothing extravagant, just enough space for me and the new life I was cultivating. At first, it felt strange to wake up every morning unburdened by past baggage. But the quiet that once haunted me began to feel comforting. I started to appreciate the stillness instead of dreading it. Rachel and I stayed in touch. We texted, called whenever we could, and even visited each other a few times. But we both understood from the beginning that we weren't destined for forever. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. She entered my life when I needed someone most, and I like to think I was there for her as well. We still check in occasionally, just simple greetings and reminders that we're okay. There's no drama, no resentment, just mutual respect and gratitude for the part we played in each other's healing. As for Sarah, I haven't heard from her since the divorce was finalized. I have no idea if she's still with the guy from those photos, and honestly, I don't care to know. I've let go of any bitterness I had toward her. Took time, but I came to realize that holding on to hate was only anchoring me in place. If she's happy, great. If not, that's not my concern. I have my own life to live now, and it's time to embrace it. Work has been steady. I found a consulting position with a smaller firm, which means fewer hours and significantly less travel. This shift has allowed me the time to focus on myself and rebuild in ways I never thought I would need. I've started going to the gym again, a commitment I let slip during the chaos of it all. It feels empowering to push my limits and witness progress, even if it's just in lifting weights. Along the way, I picked up a few new hobbies. I learned how to cook, really cook, not just reheating leftovers. I even dabbled in painting, though I wouldn't call myself an artist by any stretch. It's just a way to clear my mind. I discovered there's something incredibly satisfying about creating, even if it's just for myself. I've made new friends, too. I joined a few local groups, one for hiking, another for music lovers, and it's been refreshing to meet people who know only the version of me that exists now, not the one mired in old drama. I thought I'd miss having a best friend like Michael, but I've realized I don't need that kind of connection anymore. I'm content with the friends I have now, people I trust without constantly needing to test that trust. Dating? Yeah, I've ventured into that realm too. Nothing serious yet, just a few casual dates here and there. I'm taking my time with it. I don't feel rushed to jump into anything. And honestly, it's refreshing to enjoy getting to know someone without the pressure of expectations. I've learned to be more honest with myself about what I truly want and what I deserve. What I'm trying to convey is that I'm okay. I didn't think I'd ever reach this point, but here I am. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and that's enough. I'm still figuring things out, still learning to trust again, still coming to terms with my past mistakes. Yet every day feels a little lighter than the last, and that's more than I could have hoped for a year ago. I'm not the same person I was before everything crumbled, but I see that as a positive. I've learned to let go of people, of expectations, and the need to control every aspect of my life. I've come to understand that life is unpredictable and messy, but that doesn't mean it's not worth living. And perhaps that's the most crucial lesson of all. So yeah, I'm doing okay. Better than okay, actually. I'm still here, still standing, and for the first time in a long while, I'm eager to see what comes next. Whatever it may be, I know I'll be ready for it.